Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. With the Four Nations Face-Off kicking off this week, we are here to talk about it and make it about us. Of course, we are a baseball podcast, so we are going to be previewing or looking ahead, I guess, to the 2026 World Baseball Classic and what Team Canada might look like. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, you're more of a hockey guy than I am, but how excited are you about this Four Nations Face-Off?
I'm fired up. I'm quite excited. I'm off to Boston to go catch the Canada game against Finland next week. I think it's going to be a good, exciting tournament. And because this is a baseball podcast, of course, like you said, it's time to make it about us and make it about the Canadian baseball scene.
Yes, it may be a little bit early to be thinking about the World Baseball Classic a year from now, but you know what? I mean, hey, there's never a bad time to talk a little bit of Canadian baseball, and I think the roster is shaping up to be super interesting next year. Obviously, a little bit of a change for Canada as they are headed to Puerto Rico for their Pool A competition, which starts in March next year, where they'll be taking on Panama, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, along with a undetermined qualifier. So that's very exciting. It's going to be different than, playing USA every year, and being in kind of the more local pools. So, it's not going to be easy. Panama, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. I think that game against Puerto Rico in Puerto Rico is going to be pretty crazy. But yeah, I mean, you know what? The roster, there's a ton of Canadian talent on the horizon, kind of arriving to the big leagues, like the next wave of Canadian talent. So really looking forward to kind of seeing what they can do. Obviously, the showing last time wasn't maybe what they wanted. I believe they ended up going 2-2 with wins over Great Britain and Colombia, but losses to Mexico and the U.S. But there was of course the U.S. blowout and everything like that. But with the Four Nations obviously kind of inspiring the look ahead because there's nothing like international competition.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Last time around was definitely a transitional period. I think of the bullpen being manned by Andrew Albers and John Axford, and I don't even remember who the other 40-something-year-old was, but there were several guys that were towards the end of their career. And this time around, you're looking at Cade Smith among the AL Rookie of the Year candidates last year, and some love down the ballot. And that's just the headliner name, but there's a host of guys that are on the horizon, not only on the pitching front, but on the hitting front as well. So lots of reason to believe that things are trending upwards for Canada baseball. And as far as the 2026 tournament goes and any optimism there, it might still be too early, but you never know in a short tournament like that. So where he figured that now would be as good a time as any to do a little check-in on some of those young guys and maybe a little snapshot in time of what the team might look like about a year from now.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. We can get into it. I mean, we look at last time, you kind of get the 30-man roster, 17 pitchers, two catchers, six infielders, and five outfielders, was what they decided to run with last in 2023. So I don't know where you want to start. I think we should start on the position player side because I think the pitching is a little bit more up
Yeah.
in the
Well,
air at this
let's
point.
start with last time around who was there and who's likely to be there now as a lock.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at the 2023 roster and the guys who I think are automatically carrying over are Matt Brash, Mitch Bratt, Nick Pivetta was on the roster but didn't end up pitching, Cal Quantrill, Noah Scurro, Cade Smith, and I would put Rob Zastryzny in that group as well for the pitchers, and then catching Bo Naylor, surely, Freddie Freeman, Eddie Julian, Otto Lopez. I think Abraham Toro kind of cracks that group as well. I don't know, maybe not necessarily a lock at this point, but definitely in the mix. And then the outfield group, Owen Casey, Denzel Clark, Tyler O'Neill, and Jared Young are definitely four guys that I think will be headed to Puerto Rico if they're healthy and ready to go and everything.
Yeah, and that's a group with a lot of talent, just like last time. Freddie Freeman, of course, is the headliner, but I think Bo Naylor is going to be a couple years older. Josh Naylor, since the last time around, has really evolved as a ball player. Otto Lopez has cemented himself as a major league caliber player. So there's more talent than there was last time around, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously they didn't have Josh Naylor at the last tournament. Um, and they didn't get Freddie Freeman for the whole time. So hopefully you get those guys healthy. And I think you kind of look at it like Cade Smith emerges as, maybe the best reliever in baseball this year. Matt Brash coming back will be huge. And then, maybe you can convince Jordan Romano to put on for the home country instead of playing for Italy, which he has done. And was going to do before backing out in 2023.
Yeah, the bullpen in particular, and I know you kind of wanted to start with
We can start with
the
pitchers. That works
offense
too.
side, but I think that the pitching at the back end is the most intriguing part of this
Yeah.
potential 2026 team, with obviously lots that can change in a year's time because that's just the nature of the reliever position. But again, you look at a guy like a Cade Smith, you look at a guy like a Nick Pivetta, you look at a guy like a Mike Soroka who's going to be back to starting this year. I mean, there's a host of guys that are coming up the pipeline. The guy that I think deserves some love, I know you were kind of saying he's a little further away, but led the minor leagues in strikeouts last year. Tugboat, he's a guy that's a good bet to maybe be a contributor next year. There's a lot of guys that could be impactful reliever types. I mean, Romano, I didn't even
Yeah.
mention there.
Yeah, so let's start with pitchers. Let's do that. So let's build it out. So 17 pitchers is a lot to kind of go through. But it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of young arms who kind of have the potential. Starting with the rotation, I mean, I think you kind of lock Nick Pivetta in there. And then if you're looking at like if you get your veteran guys, kind of committing, I think you can kind of build a rotation of Nick Pivetta, Michael Soroka, Jamison Tyone and Cal Quantrill. Like I think that's a foursome that it has some veteran experience. Are guys who have committed to the program in the past. I know Tyone and Pavetta both wanted to pitch. Tyone had just kind of come off signing that contract with the Cubs, so he wasn't able to do that. And Pavetta obviously kind of backed out at the last minute with an injury. So and Soroka also was coming off an injury that year. So, all this just goes to show like anything can change and anything kind of can happen at the last minute. But I think you kind of look at those four as maybe the guys that you can kind of lock into that rotation. I know, if you want to like play the upside game, you look at like a Mitch Bratt, a Jonah Tong, like you mentioned, Matt Wilkinson. Those are guys who I don't necessarily think are going to have the major league experience by the time this tournament rolls around, but certainly are talented in their own rights and have the potential to crack that group. But I think that for a year away is okay for us to kind of pencil in.
Yeah, it's not like a electric starting rotation by any means. Obviously, you're looking at teams like the US are probably going to be sending some really talented pitchers. I'm sure the Dominican will have lots of talent to come in terms of their rotation, but that's four major league quality starters in
Yeah.
my estimation. Three, if you think Michael Soroka is more of a reliever type, but you think of the success he had with the White Sox towards the end of the year, and all of a sudden that's just another high leverage arm in what is already arguably a top five bullpen potentially in that tournament. And again, a year out, who knows what's going to happen exactly. But as things stand right now, Canada is set up nicely on the pitching side.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think we can lock in those four as four of our 17 pitchers on the roster. You're excited about Matt Wilkinson. I'm excited about Jonah Tong. Like that's if there's one guy that I would pick to kind of crack that rotation, he's the guy I'm picking. He obviously had a breakout year with the Mets. He won their pitcher of the year for their minor league system. Wilkinson did the same for the Guardians, but Tong, a guy with like electric stuff who got up to double A, you could probably see him crack triple A this year and maybe be positioned to be a major league starter in 2026 in New York. And I think everything I just said applies to Wilkinson as well. But obviously Tong, that they're both very exciting pitchers, and Tong, a little more velocity than Wilkinson, but still, a couple guys that I think would be fun out of the bullpen in relief to kind of have on the roster and to carry with you and get that international experience. So I think if we're building it out, you put those four, you put Wilkinson, you put Bratt, you put Tong in that group, and that gets you to seven. So we got 10 more spots, and we don't have to go through every single one. But I think, like we mentioned, locks in the bullpen: Cade Smith, Matt Brash, Eric Sabrowski, Zach Pop, Rowan Wick. Rowan Wick was pitching in Japan, I believe, last year, so maybe a major league comeback for him, but he was pretty good. Just looking at his baseball reference page. So, that's maybe a couple guys that you can get there in the back of your bullpen, and that brings us up to, I believe that's how many pitchers do we got there? Throw Adam Macko in the mix, and I think that gets us to 14. So you still kind of got three spots left. What do you think of like that kind of group there?
I think that group's fun. I like the Mako mention. I think that we neglected to include him. He's not in the Tong discussion, not in the Wilkinson, the tugboat discussion, but a guy that is starting in the Blue Jays system, mind you, and a guy that is working his way up. Probably not a big league starter, and if he is, maybe a five. But at that point in time, reason to believe, given the velocity, given the strikeout ability, because he's really, the ability to get guys out by putting them away is something that he kind of uniquely provides. That not everybody that's going to be available to Team Canada has been able to do at the high level, or at the high, excuse me, the high minors or above. So I think that's another thing that's going to make Mako a really compelling piece. Might even be in the big leagues this year. And if he is in the big leagues this year, that makes him all the more compelling, I think, for Team Canada to potentially make him part of the equation.
Yeah, 100%. I think the big league experience is really important for those guys who, are kind of on the cusp, like having that. It just the experience of pitching in the big leagues, I think, is really valuable, especially when you're going to be going into quite the environment in Puerto Rico, I would
Yeah,
say.
which is going to be, I mean, I'm sure I've seen, uh, those summer leagues in the Caribbean and stuff. They're a different level of electric. So that'll be fun. I don't know. You mentioned it off the top that they're in a bit of a group of death, but they're part of the group of death equation, I think.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good group. Like Panama is pretty good. They play, I think maybe, a little bit above their parts, right? Like probably not gonna be a full recognizable roster for Major League fans, but still a solid baseball country. Puerto Rico is obviously gonna be just overflowing with major league talent, and Cuba, again, like they made it to the semifinals in 2023, and kind of it's going to be that same group, I believe, kind of going back there. So will be fun to watch. Yeah, I think it's going to be a bloodbath. I think Puerto Rico is probably head and shoulders the favorite there, and then Canada's going to be kind of competing with Panama and Cuba to kind of get that second spot and come out of the group.
Yeah, a couple Blue Jays in the mix there. You got Leo Jimenez and Paulo Espino on Panama, just double checking the lineup there. But that's not obviously a star-studded team, but it's a team with talent. So that's part of the equation. But then, of course, the two big bats or the big bullies will be Puerto Rico and Cuba. But
Yeah.
Canada should be a fun part of that equation.
Especially if they can get everybody there.
Exactly. Well, if we're talking about everybody there because of the guys missing last time, let's talk some hitting and let's talk
Well, we still have
obviously
three
the
three pitching spots left to fill. We only got to 14.
I mean, who are you looking at for those last three? Because that three, I think it's kind of like go for it. And
Yeah,
I don't even have an
like
answer to those
it'll
last three.
be it'll kind of be, I think, the whoever like emerges it over the course of 2025, right? I think Rob Zastryzny is a guy who's pitched a bunch for Canada. He was at the 2023 WBC. He's got major league experience, so I think he's a guy that will probably be there. Was just DFA'd by the Cubs a few days ago, but he'll land on his feet somewhere, like, right, like he's a high minors depth guy at this point, but I think
Mhm.
he's probably a nice bullpen piece. I think if you're looking at like potential upside plays, like LP Langevin, he was just drafted by the Royals this year, and I think he had the third highest strikeout rate in Division I baseball behind Chase Burns and Trey Savage. So like, I mean, there's obviously the talent level there, or Hagen Smith was ahead of him. But so obviously, the talent level's there, and he's a guy who you could probably see shooting up through through the minors this year. I think he's an interesting candidate. Eric Sarantola, another guy in the Royal system. He was just added to their 40 man, and he was in AAA last year. But huge strikeout stuff. Punches out a ton of hitters. I think he probably makes his MLB debut this year. So I think you kind of look at him as another relief piece. Obviously, you know what, the way that we built it out, like we probably have more starters in the mix than we do relievers, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I think Langevin and Sarantola are two names to keep an eye on this year. Obviously, Romano is going to be kind of a huge play there as if he does pick Canada over Italy. And then there's a couple guys too, like Curtis Taylor. He just signed with St. Louis. He was there last time.
Former
There's a
Blue
bunch
Jays
of
farmhand.
former Blue Jays farmhand, indeed. And you kind of look at like some of the other names who are at the 2023 World Baseball Classic, RJ Freer, Trevor Brigden, Indigo Diaz. I think Indigo Diaz, interesting name to watch. Yankee system had TJ in 2023, came back and threw 11 innings um, last year in the minors. So I think he's an interesting name to watch as well as like a reliever who could kind of make his way into the mix. And then I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce this last name, but Evan Rutgage. He was also at the 2023 WBC, so he's a guy that could also kind of figure his way in there. But yeah, I think you kind of look at like that group, and then there's obviously like so many Canadians in the minors right now, like Matt Duffy. Is a guy. Garrett Hawkins is 25 in the Padres system. I think he has a chance to kind of be a quicker riser this year. Jordan Balazovic just re-signed in the majors after pitching in Korea, so there's another name there. Um, just a bunch of guys, but I think kind of it's nice that they do have like kind of like those 12, 13, 14 locks that can kind of lead into, and then you can kind of evaluate the rest of these guys and pick what you want and what you need from them as far as getting guys there and guys who are not, no offense to like Adam Lowe and John Axford, Scott Matheson, Philip Amont, like no offense to those guys, but I don't think that they're going to be going the 40-year-old path at this WBC.
There's a level of length, there's a level of depth that this team hasn't been afforded in years past, and I think that's a sign of a healthy Canadian baseball landscape. And I think it's also a really exciting kind of setup for the next 5 years and beyond.
Yeah, and you know what really does set them up for the next 5 years and beyond is the potential lineup that they could be running out. Because I think that this group is young and it's pretty exciting. We can, start with the catchers. I think the catchers are fairly set in stone for guys who they can probably lock in there and barring injury or whatever. I think Bo Naylor and Liam Hicks are going to be their two catchers. Bo Naylor goes without saying, he's the best Canadian catcher right now, major league starter in the postseason. Kind of he was a starter last go round, and Liam Hicks was just the second overall pick in the Rule 5 draft, so he's going to have that major league experience in Miami this year. Seemingly is able to manage a staff, and I think he'll probably be a nice addition as kind of the backup catcher for Canada.
Yeah, upside in that group. And I mean, Naylor goes without saying, like you said, this is one of the more talented young catchers in all of baseball. And even though some of the hitting hasn't translated in an extremely meaningful way to the big leagues in ways that it was in the minor leagues, still extremely young, still a guy that's really talented and should be a keystone for baseball in this country for, I think, the next decade.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a few nailers that kind of fit that, right? So, infield wise, I think your group of six is like pretty easy to pick out to me. Freddie Freeman, Josh Naylor, Tyler Black, Otto Lopez, Eddie Julian, Abraham Toro. Do you see anybody else cracking that group?
I think you've pretty much nailed it. There's a lot of like young guys again in that group. You look at Tyler Black as a name there. Uh, Otto Lopez has finally made his way into the big leagues and found a spot. Eddie Julian, obviously a down year last year, but a guy that's shown he can do it at the big league level. Abraham Toro is getting up there a little bit, but he's not. Well, I think he's on the right side of 30 still. Like there's some youth in relative terms with almost all of these guys.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's interesting because it's kind of like how do you line up that infield? Because obviously Naylor and Freeman are both first basemen, and I don't think that Josh Naylor's outfield days are coming back in 2026. So he's probably your DH though, I would imagine at that tournament. And you go Freddie Freeman at first, Eddie Julian at second, Otto Lopez at short, and Tyler Black at third. I think he could probably
Mhm.
handle that for 4 games or however long that the tournament goes, and it's worth it, obviously, with the ability that he brings with the bat to kind of
For sure,
sacrifice a
for
little bit
sure,
of
for
defense
sure.
there. If you're looking for other guys who might kind of jump into the mix, whether somebody's unavailable or if Freddie Freeman somehow decides to play for the U.S. or anything like that. I mean, Charles LeBlanc played for the Angels last year. He's in the Braves organization now. He's a guy that probably gives you some defensive versatility on the infield. David McCabe also in the Brave system. I don't necessarily see him being a guy who's going to be ready to crack like an infield like this, but Damiano Palmajani, AAA experience. We'll see what goes with him this year. Maybe he
Miles
repeats
Naylor's
AAA.
another guy as
Miles
well.
Naylor, again, he's going to be pretty young for the kind of the group that they have there, I think. But again, like if you're looking for, like, say they have Freeman, Naylor, Tyler Black, Lopez, and Eddie Julian there, and say Abraham Toro isn't able to go, like you have a pretty solid 5-man group there. So I don't think that Miles Naylor, you get him that international experience as a guy who could be a key part of like the 2030 team.
Exactly, exactly, right? That's for sure. This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
All right, let's move on to the outfield. You get 5 outfielders. I think this group again is going to be pretty similar to the one that they took in 2023. You got Tyler O'Neill, Owen Casey, Denzel Clark. Deshaun Brown was also there, and then Jared Young. And I think that's a pretty set in stone group of 5 that
Yeah,
would
I
be
think
tough
that's
for anybody else to get into.
yeah, and it's not like it's the same way where there's guys necessarily beating down the door on the outfield front. I have some Deshaun Brown excitement. Again, obviously a Blue Jays farmhand, which maybe paints the glasses a little bit rose colored. But everything you hear about him, obviously reaches AA this year, and the defense is just incredible. Makes me think that, listen, if he's not a big league guy necessarily in the Blue Jays system, it is what it is. But his defensive chops, his ability to play center field at a gold glove level caliber, which is what he was awarded last year as a minor league gold glover, that is so valuable, I think, to this Team Canada group.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think he's probably your defense and speed guy. If he takes a step with the bat this year, you could definitely see, um, maybe he cracks that group. But I think the outfield threesome of Owen Casey, Denzel Clark, and Tyler O'Neill is pretty exciting. And like,
Yeah.
the Freeman Black, Naylor, Julian Lopez infield group is like pretty exciting. But I'm really excited about that outfield group
Yeah.
because Clark is a stud. He's got the speed, he's got the power, he's got all the tools. Owen Casey. He's
Lots
he's
to
one of the top prospects in baseball.
lots
He's
to
got the
dream on.
power to dream on, right? Like him and Tyler O'Neill in the corners is going to be, just a load of power for anybody to deal with. And you put Clark in between them, and I think you feel pretty good about what that group is going to bring.
You're pretty excited. Again, like you said, it's a group that's got a lot of upside. They're pretty young and it's exciting. It's I think just
Yeah.
that's the word, right? Is that this is such an exciting upcoming. I mean, there's still 12 months to go,
Yes,
but
there's
it's
much to be decided.
it's an exciting 12 months here where I think that instead of praying that guys don't crumble, you're seeing how these young guys are kind of going up and up and up and up and up. And if they are able to become major league contributors or at least reach the high minors and be effective, really talented players.
Yeah, you know what something that's really cool is I think that in 2023 they kind of laid the foundation for this team, right? By taking Bo Naylor, by taking Owen Casey, by taking Denzel Clark, by taking Deshaun Brown and Damiano Palmajani and all these guys that they took. And you kind of bear the fruits of it in 2026, where they're going to want to be back there. Obviously, like Kate Smith is one of those guys, and all these dudes like having that World Baseball Classic experience. I think it's only going to pay off, and I think you even look at what those guys did in 2023, right? Like I think Eddie Julian was awesome. He was the World Baseball Classic OPS leader in 2023 of any player to be a qualified hitter in the tournament. And you bring these guys back, and Owen Casey, he hit a home run in the tournament. Like Jared Young hit a home run against USA, right? So these guys aren't going to be afraid of the big stage because you kind of got them that experience. And I don't think that Canada was like necessarily in a position where they could leave them out of that 2023 roster just based on like there weren't the other pieces there, so they kind of needed them to come. But the
Yeah,
fact that
but
they
now it's
performed and got that
bearing
experience,
fruit. Now
yeah,
it's exactly that.
exactly.
It's bearing fruit.
So yeah, really exciting, and it's going to be a really really fun team to watch. I think it's kind of the next generation of Canadian baseball will have arrived by the time that the 2026 World Baseball Classic
Very exciting.
starts. Um, Before we do go, like let's build a lineup because I think Dream building this lineup is pretty exciting. I think you kind of look at it, obviously, you would like Eddie Julian to have a bounce back year and kind of be able to take on the role as your leadoff guy. I think is it fair to pencil him into that leadoff
I think
spot?
that's about right. I think you're looking at him in the one slot in the leadoff spot, and then you're probably looking at Freeman maybe as your two guy, and then maybe Tyler O'Neill as your three. Sounds about right to me.
Yep, that makes sense to me. And then you go Naylor four. It's a little left-handed heavy, but I think that's kind of where your strength is for sure. And
And then
then from there, I think you could go
I'm thinking Casey. I'm
five.
thinking Casey
Casey,
five.
well, he's a lefty too, though.
So who are you thinking at five?
Tyler Black, also left-handed.
Do you think that there's a bit of a pattern emerging?
Maybe you go Denzel Clark to split up your lefties. So you go Clark five, you go Casey six. Bo Naylor's
Clark
also a
seven.
lefty. Oh man.
I don't think you can be picking
Yeah,
here.
you're
I think
just
you go. I think you're going Naylor seven, Clark eight, and then your nine guy. Who's your nine guy? What do we have left?
auto.
Otto's your nine. I think that's a good lineup. I think that's a lineup with a lot of major league talent.
Yeah,
That's a good lineup.
it's probably, it's almost an entire major league group, like the 30 guys that we picked on
It's a good
February
squad. It's
11th,
a squad.
2024 or
It's
2025.
exactly. It's not. Listen, stuff's gonna change. We're a year out, but that's a squad. That's a goddamn squad.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Like, obviously the Justin Morneau, Jason Bay, Russell Martin, like that kind of generation, we're like in between that and I think the next generation, right? And that generation is going to be Owen Casey, Denzel Clark, Otto Lopez, Edouard Julian, Matt Brash, Kate Smith. Like these are the guys that are up next. And um as we saw in 2023, like there's no better spot than this very short tournament to kind of prove your mettle as a professional baseball player and kind of setting the stage for great seasons. We saw it with Julian and kind of all these guys as far as like setting them up for future success. Before before we do get out of here, I mean, we went through it, but like who is the young guy that you think could be like the emergent star for Canada in 2026?
I think this is an obvious one. I don't think that there's a question. It's Owen Casey. I think Owen Casey's got an opportunity to explode onto the scene in a way that Edward Julian did, but even to an even greater degree because Eddie Julian came up and was kind of a prospect lover's kind of a sneaky pick. Owen Casey's a bona fide top 50 prospect in baseball, and this year he'll probably spend in AAA. Might get a crack at the show.
Get
Then
him get
next
him a spot
year,
in that outfield, man. You know what?
like
Like they've got so much talent in the outfield in Chicago, but like, man, you got to find a spot for this guy.
you got to find a spot for him. And like maybe Casey's a guy that this time next year we're like, how could we have possibly thought it'd be a breakout? He'll have the breakout 6 months earlier, but can plant that flag on Owen Casey. I think that's the easy pick.
Here's an interesting take. I think that Bo Naylor at the 2026 WBC becomes like Captain Canada.
That would be pretty electric.
I think that there's going to be a big spot for him to kind of like take a leadership role on that team. And obviously, you know what, he's going to have his brother there. There's Tyler O'Neill. There's all these veteran starters. But I think that's the 2026 World Baseball Classic is in a rival spot for Bo Naylor.
I like it. I see it. I see the vision.
All right. You got anything else on 2026 World Baseball Classic?
Well, it's probably too early to say this, but here's hoping things go well.
Never too early for well wishes, I would suppose. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter. And the pod is at BEV_pod. Thank you so much for listening.